when it comes to, so you talked about the drug laws, and obviously one of the ones that really resonates with us is voting rights.
Yeah, so my argument in the book is that every single voter registration law should be repealed, right? And that's different from voter eligibility requirements. I believe that we still need voter eligibility requirements, and I don't want people to at me. I'm not saying that dead people can vote. That's You're ineligible to vote if you're not alive. I think that's a fair standard. I'm not even saying that non-citizens can vote. I can make an argument that we should allow non-citizens to vote, but that's not the argument I make in the book. I'm like, all right, you want to say the citizenship is a requirement for voting rights? That's fine. Once you meet the eligibility requirements, why should you have to pre-register? Right? If I am eligible to vote, why can't I just show up and vote? Why do I have to register days, weeks, sometimes months in advance? Why do I have to go through a second hoop when I'm already eligible to vote? You see, voter registration requirements do not prevent ineligible voters from voting. Voter eligibility requirements prevents that.
And then of course, when the Supreme Court ruled that, oh, it was a case of Ohio, white guy sued. Oh, you haven't voted in the last 2 or 3 elections, so yeah, they got to remove you from the polls. Wait, what? Why in the hell?
These voter purges happen because of voter registration requirements, not voter eligibility requirements, right? People who who are eligible to vote, should be allowed to show up and vote for whoever they want, whenever there's an election, they are being prevented from voting because of these ridiculous registration requirements, right? We should get rid of them. And again, not only do you not have to take my word for it, this is not a solution that I am the only person that has come up with. Every other major democracy on this earth either has automatic registration, mandatory registration, or same day registration. Every other democracy collapses the friction between being eligible to vote and being registered to vote. But they don't have that distinction. We are the only one that has this two-step process. First, be eligible, then prove registration, usually weeks or months in advance before you're actually allowed to vote. It's stupid, right? We have one state in this country that doesn't have voter registration requirements: North Dakota. There are a lot of voter fraud or voter voter fraud stories coming out of North Dakota. Yeah. Is North Dakota even a blue state? I mean, people always are attacking me saying like, oh, I'm
Right.
just trying to make it easier for Democrats to win. Not necessarily. North Dakota is not a blue state, and it has no registration requirements. The reason why North Dakota has no registration requirements is because North Dakota has, relatively speaking, a large Native American population, and they want to make it easier for the Native people to vote. And the way to make it easier for Native people to vote is to not have a registration requirement. You have an eligibility requirement. You show up. Hey, I'm eligible to vote. Great. You vote. Boom. Simple. Democratic. That's all you need. And it's all North Dakota needs. It's all France needs. It's all Israel needs. It's all Chile needs. It's all the UK needs. It's all Australia needs. I can list the countries. We are alone in our stupidity over voter registration.
Um, and again, when you have the mansions of the world who, oh, they love and they praise John Lewis and Christian cinema, but then they prevent the John Lewis, voter law from actually being passed. And then Democrats privately agreed to a mansions deal. Oh, let's go forward with voter ID, things along those lines, undercutting all of the progressive legal arguments.
Right. The Democrats, again, when they come into office, they don't do the things necessary to expand voting rights. The best you can hope for Democrats is that they will try to prevent the further restriction of voting rights. But it's hard to get people to vote for we're stopping the further restriction. Right?
Or even in blue states. I mean, look, you're there in New York State. New York State, for a very long time, had some of the worst voting laws in America. They were worse than a lot of red states.
Still does. In my chapter on voter registration, I focus on New York's laws, not Texas, not Florida, not one of these red states. New York still has some of the worst voting laws in the country. Why? Because having voter restrictions, having voter suppression helps the establishment, right? In New York.
So why? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
In New York, the way that it really works is that it makes it very hard to vote in New York if you are a renter, which, a city, when you think about New York City, a city with 8 million people, most of them renters.
Lot of renters.
What that does is that it decreases the power of New York City vis-a-vis the rest of the state. In fairness, the first massive voter registration law in the country was passed in New York in the 1870s. Why? Because New York was getting a lot of immigrants from Europe, was getting a lot of former freed slaves migrating up from the South, and they decided that they didn't want to have all those people who were going to be eligible to vote. They didn't want to have all those people able to vote, so they added a voter registration requirement. But critically, that voter registration requirement in New York State only applied to New York City. So if you lived in Brooklyn, you had to register to vote. But if you lived in Syracuse, if you lived in Albany, if you lived on Long Island, you didn't have to register to vote. Why? Because white folks with money lived in those places, whereas black people, immigrants, lived in the city, and those were the people they didn't want to allow to vote. New York State is not just one of the worst now, it's one of the worst historically when it comes to voting rights.
So why do voting rights advocates, why do they just keep skipping New York State? Like you don't see voting rights groups holding mass rallies in Albany or New York City or whatever the heck. What? Because it's blue?
Because it's blue. I mean, that's the only answer that I've got. Because it's blue. Because they think that they've got bigger fish to fry. And if you make it easier for people to register vote, and vote in states like North Carolina and states like Mississippi, obviously in states like Georgia, you can flip those states. You can turn those states from red to blue, because as we know, Texas, and the line about Texas is always, Texas is not a red state, it's a non-voting state, right? And if you got a lot of more people registered in Texas, you could flip Texas blue, and that would completely change the map of America. So I understand why they focus some of their efforts, more of their efforts, in places in the South as opposed to New York State. But I think it would show how nonpartisan the voting rights and voter registration movement is if they had as much smoke for New York as they have for places in the South. Because again, it doesn't have to be a partisan issue. Making sure that it's easy and frictionless for people to register to vote and then vote doesn't necessarily mean that Democrats win. It means that Americans win. It means that Americans get to participate in their government, as was promised to us in our flawed Constitution. That's a bigger goal than any one party being in power in any one state. Of course, the Republicans understand that their best chance of winning is to have the fewest amount of people voting, right? And that's where we get to the voter ID laws. Now, I've made the argument, Roland, that if you gave me automatic registration, if you gave me the mandatory registration, automatic registration, portable registration also being entirely critical, right? So like your registration should follow you when you move. You shouldn't have to re-register, right? Going back to New York, if I move from apartment 2B to apartment 1A in my own building, I got to re-register to vote. So a huge thing is voter registration portability is something that we need in this country. But if you gave me all of that, I would give you voter ID. If you want to give me a national voter ID that everybody can get, that is free. Free is critical because the 24th Amendment constitutionally prohibits a poll tax, and having an ID that you have to pay for becomes a form of poll tax, however small you might argue that it is. So if you give me a free, easily accessible national ID, and in exchange you give me national voter registration and portability and automatic registration, I make that trade every day. I make that trade every day. You know who doesn't? The Republicans. Because the Republicans aren't actually concerned with voter fraud. They don't actually want to stop voter fraud because voter fraud doesn't really exist. They want to stop people from voting. And my plan would make it easier for eligible citizens to vote, even if they had to get an ID to prove that they are eligible. And that's why Republicans will never go for it.